Hello, Sump Snipes and Superheroes. My name is TB's Guy, and let's do this. Let's have a look at that trailer for Riot Games' upcoming animated series, Arcane. Presumably coming out in 2020, because that's what they said it did, and it looks, from the little bits they've shown us, like they are in a fairly late stage of production, so here's hoping that that is true and that there will be no delays. So, I guess as you can see, rather than doing my usual YouTube thing, I have taken the footage and put it into Premiere Pro in the hopes of avoiding, you know, compression hell, like what we got on the last one. And to reiterate some of the details that I went over back when I did a reaction stream to the actual announcement stream that Riot did, this is a production by Studio Fortiche, which are the same people who did the Rise music video for Worlds and the Get Jinxed music video for, well, for Jinx here, who's gonna be a major player, it seems, in the Arcane universe. And Studio Fortiche has, well, they have this style. They have a very unique, very sort of angular, very well sculpted style, where the characters, like, anytime you pause an image, you could be convinced that you're looking at, like, a well-done 2D illustration, if not for the motion blur. And they work a lot with the mixed media of mixing 2D and 3D, and that's something that you can see, especially if we head back and hit up the, yeah, there we go. If you look at the contrails coming off this barge flying overhead, these, at least aesthetically, I imagine they're rendered as 3D objects within the scene, but these are 2D flat surfaces, giving it more of that sort of animated, like, hand-animated look. And that's something that extends into their approach to texturing and lighting as well. That's why these things can look so painterly when you pause them, is because there is that sort of handcrafted animation approach to, like, where things look painted, where they apply textures and they use lighting effects in a way that give the scenes a kind of, well, I say painted, like, when I say painterly, I don't mean a painting as in classical oil painting, but a painting as in digital painting, which is an art style that you'll see, like, around a lot. And for my money, God, I love it. It's like, oh, I like this so much. Like, you can really see what I mean when you look at, for instance, the panels in the background here. Look at that. Look at those smudges of like, brightness and color kind of applied liberally to the surface of the thing. Which gives you that sense of the environment being painted or almost drawn on, which is a style that's become more and more popular, really, in 3D animation, as it's sort of, the idea of approaching realism is kind of, I hope at least, it's dying in 3D animation, because it's so, it bores me tremendously. And what I've seen instead a lot of places, and especially in productions like what Studio Fortiche is doing, and a lot of the studios that Riot have been working with, is an attempt to mix, like, the aesthetics and the influences of 2D into 3D animation. And that's something Netflix's The Dragon Prince, which came out, which has a third season coming out soon, I think, does something similar, where it tries to apply the aesthetics of limited animation to 3D spaces, and also has kind of a 2D animated visual style. And as for my money, like, the stuff I'm seeing, like, especially this shot, is lovely. Like the coin falling on. I wonder who that guy in the background is. Like the coin falling over and the camera kind of tracking it through there. And then the knife coming down, and you see that right there is the kind of thing that I'm really talking about with Studio Fortiche and their approach to sort of 2D effects. Because you just get these two frames of little sparks as the knife comes down, and when you watch that in motion, like, you barely notice it when you see the knife actually moving in motion, but when you know to look for it, you see it gives that little extra pump to the motion and to the thing that happens. So, let's start by trying to identify some characters. The prevailing theory among, like, me and everyone is that this is Vi, and the girl with blue hair is definitely Jinx, and this is the origin story of those two particular characters, which is going to involve a little bit of retconning on Riot's part, because that's definitely not how it goes in their lore as it stands right now. It's, of course, also entirely possible that Riot are just fucking baiting us. Like, presumably there's more than one pink-haired teenager and blue-haired teenager walking around in Son. Could be. they're betting us it's not Vi and Jinx, but it's two completely different people, and then Jinx shows up at the end for unrelated reasons. Not impossible. Not impossible at all. But I'm reasonably sure that this is Vi and Jinx. Like, that's gonna be my guess. Especially since the word that I've heard is that this is meant to be a prequel. Like, this is not set in contemporary, like in the modern day, or the present lore state of League of Legends. This is set in the past. For which reason I would also expect not to see Echo, because if this is Vi and Jinx, then he's definitely going to be like a little kid. Like, he's gonna be like 5 years old here. Which is why I'm also suspecting that this is Victor, and this is Jace. Which would be interesting, because as far as I remember, Jace was from Piltover. Although I haven't actually checked up on that. Most specifically because, like, look at Victor's hair, or this guy's hair, especially, and look at the Hextech goggles that the other kid is wearing. Like, those are really sort of the elements. That, and you can kind of see that they have a friendly relationship-ish, but they also kind of annoy each other. Which, again, very much the dynamic that Victor and Jace has. Like, it's entirely plausible that these are original characters. They have nothing to do with League of Legends. I just feel like the dynamic between them, like the big, broad-shouldered, big, honest-faced dude here, and then Captain Giant Forehead, massive eyebrows clearly stuck in his head over here, yeah, that would map pretty well onto those particular archetypes. But again, if this is Victor and Jace, gonna be a lot of retconning happening in the background of League of Legends lore, which I would appreciate and approve of, because one of the things that's been annoying me a lot about League of Legends lore, well, annoying me, I say, one of the things I've always lamented about League of Legends lore is that there's so many, like, you have these extraordinary individuals in the League of Legends universe, but so many of them are just, like, not connected to each other at all when you would expect them. Like, you would expect Jace and Victor to be familiar with Vi and familiar with Jinx, and like to like maybe they have some kind of past together, maybe they ran into each other. You would expect there to be more of a living, breathing universe between them. Not necessarily that they were friends, but that they each, at some point in the past, because of being champions, because of having an outsized impact on the world, that they would intersect with each other's stories. So I'm hoping this is Victor, I'm hoping this is Jace. Sure would be nice. Can't be entirely sure, though. I am reasonably sure, though, that this guy's Mundo. Right here at the end, some people said, oh, we see pink hair, so maybe this is Vi, the Vi, or the pink-haired girl character being infused with him, but no. First of all, because the eyebrows are different. This character has a completely different eyebrow shape than... You see? Big, thick eyebrows on the pink-haired girl, who I'm gonna call Vi, because, let's be real. Whereas this guy... See? Very different eyebrow shape. Also... the eyes turn white after him being infused with some purple stuff that makes all of his veins pump out, and he seems to be bulking himself up. This is Mundo. This is gonna be Mundo, and if I had to take a guess, like a very broad guess that might be proven wrong, this stuff right here that's corrupting Mundo, it might be that poor Jinx gets exposed either to that or to some of that. See, those are Hex Crystals, I believe. Hex Crystals, which are, if I remember my lore correctly, harvested from the Brackhern, that's Skarner's people in Shurima. They contain tremendous amounts of magical power. They're used to power a bunch of Hextech stuff. Here we see Jinx somehow having gotten her hands on one of them, and here we see what can happen if one of those is allowed to go boom. And you know who else likes to go boom? Well... Anyway, let's actually get into looking at the animation that's on display here. Because there's a certain movement style, like not just to, and again, look how much this looks like an illustration, basically. There's a certain movement style to the way Fortiche animates these characters, and kind of also to the way that they just animate in general, I think. And I kind of feel like this might be a matte painting kind of situation where the background is painted, like it's a flat painted object that's just being projected onto the background of a 3D space, and then they're having the thing move around in it. And I think it might be the same thing here. It might be. Like, that would be a way to do it, and keep that painterly look. So there's a certain aesthetic of movement to Fortiche's characters, which is kind of distinct from, like, it's sort of DreamWorksy, But it's very distinct from something like you'd see coming out of, for example, Disney Pixar. Like, they really don't move in a Disney Pixar kind of way. Like, they don't move, like, Pixar characters especially, move with, like, heavy application, tend to have heavy application of squash and stretch principles. And Disney especially, too, because, like, well, they originated a lot of those. But with the characters in this, I get more of a sense of... They move almost a little bit like stop motion. Like, they move a little bit more like they are physical puppets being manipulated. And that's not a criticism. That's not like a good or a bad thing. It's more a thing about the physicality that the characters express. And I really wish we could get a longer... Yeah, you can kind of see it in the walking scene here. Especially on the character... I'm going to call him Victor, even if he isn't. Take a look at how his walk cycle goes. You see that, right? Like, he's moving with a certain kind of stiffness to his motion that makes him feel a little bit more plasticky. Like, and again, it's hard to find the language to describe this without sounding like I'm being critical or insulting it, but it is a sense of characters being just a little bit more meaty, a little bit more fleshy. Like, they have stiff joints inside them, where Pixar characters oftentimes, like, they move brilliantly, but they can also oftentimes feel like they're made of rubber. Like, it's the difference between plastic and rubber, basically. I think is sort of what I'm trying to express here. And it works really well. You can also kind of see it in this dude, like the way he moves his face closer. I wish I had the language to describe exactly what I mean, but it is something about the aesthetic of movement that's on display here. And I do love the little visual gesture. You see the gesture that he's making with his face? What he's saying here is, like, power comes to those who are willing to do absolutely anything for it. And you can see how he punctuates the last thing he says. He's looking at the guy's throat, basically, right now. And he punctuates the last word he says by looking up. Now, some people have theorized that this guy is Singed. And that's not impossible, although I don't remember Singed having, like, a mechanical Hex Tech eye. Oh, look at that. Look at this clever... Like, well, it's not clever. It's just a nice little thing. Here, we have presumably Jinx is looking at one of those Hex Tech crystals because of the blue glow. Look at the glow on her face. Whoop. As she closes her hand and focuses on what the cut implies is this guy coming in to look... well, presumably confront her. You can see how the glow disappears, not just from her face, but also from her eyes. You can see that little highlight vanishing as she kind of returns to the real world. That's a lovely little bit of acting being aided by the lighting as well. You get the sense like she's entranced with this thing, and then whoop, the real world reasserts itself, and the glow has to go away. And look at the background in this shot. Again, complete painterly style. And I like you can see if you look out around the rim of the shot here, a blur effect, a kind of camera... Yeah, a kind of Gaussian, maybe a camera blur effect, meaning that we have a centered focus in the middle of the screen, of course, which is where we have the guy framed by the doorway, who we are supposed to look at, but it also gives you the sense that this is shot with a camera rather than being shot. And that's something that's on display in a lot of this, is that they're mimicking very much the film language of film, down to the ways that the camera moves. Look at this, for example. Look at that camera shake. Look how the camera, as the door gets burst open, the camera reacts almost as though it too has been jostled by these kids bursting out through this door to run away. Again, presumably from Mr. Top Hat guy. And look at the angle as well. You can see that there's a little, like, the horizontal line is skewed. So we have what's called a Dutch angle in film language, which is like you basically twist the camera a little bit so that it's a slightly askew, and you have kind of an uneasy vibe. Like, it gives a vibe of being unsteady, of being uneasy, of being in motion or being chaotic. Like, it can help aid those moods in a bit of camera production. And I love the movement of Vi as she bursts through the door here. Look at this. You can kind of see that she's charged at the door with all her weight, to the point where, like, the door is actually kind of bulging out, this giant metal door. Oops, hang on. And you can see, like, her entire body weight is in the upper body as she moves through the door. So you can see she bursts through the door. The resistance of the door gives away. Like, she has nothing to push herself up against anymore. And I can kind of see she kind of has to catch herself, because her weight is so far forward, she kind of has to run to catch up to her own upper body in order not to tumble and fall over. And that's just the physicality of that is just really nice. And you can see it on, like, Jinx that's following her. You can, and again, here you can kind of see that stiffness that I was kind of talking about, because as these characters run, which, like, running is like a very extreme form of movement, there really isn't, there's barely any squash and stretch. Maybe a little bit on Vi's arm here as it swings past. Like, maybe here they're doing a little bit of stretching in order to really sell the whipping motion of it going back and forth. But if you look at, for example, Jinx, who's following her, the model is very, very, very consistent. Like, there's no squash and stretching going on that's visible. Like, there might be squash and stretch going on in the detail, but there's no visible squash and stretch. And that's what gives them that solid feeling, which I think suits the series really well. Like, this is Sawn. This is not, you know, goofy cartoon land. This is a place for solidness, for solidity, for true facts. And here, have a look at this. Like, this is, again, the stuff that I fell in love with Fortiche when I first saw the Jinx music video, was that mixing of 2D and 3D aesthetics. And you can really see that here in the way they animate the lightning and the smoke effects and the lighting effects of this thing as it explodes. And you can see the timing difference. This is something we talk about a lot when we do these animation breakdowns. See that? So look at the smoke, right? As it bursts out, here the camera moves, which means time is moving forward in the scene, but the smoke stays static. Next frame, boom, the smoke changes, but the next frame after that, it doesn't. And then the next frame, the smoke changes, but the next frame after that, it doesn't. What that's called is something we talked about before, animating on twos, which means if the movie file is moving at 24 frames per second, which most of them are 23.995 or something along those lines, then every other frame is when you animate something. And this is how Disney tends to animate a lot of their movies. They don't animate on ones, except very rarely when they really, really need to, because hand animating on ones is 1,200 billion tons of work. Like, it's an extreme amount of work. But doing that, animating on twos, is also part of the movement aesthetic of, like, versus, because the 3D animation moves on ones, like, usually. And you can see that here. Every time we advance a frame, something or someone moves in the image. 2D animation doesn't do that, typically, because it's a million times too much work to deal with. And that's what gives that smoke explosion there, like, that particular characteristic, that cartoony characteristic that it's got, is the fact that it's animated on twos while everything else is moving on ones. And I wonder if that's true for the shadow too, or if they're rendering the shadow properly. No, the shadows... Oh, wait, actually. There's a little bit of it. There's this one little tick. Oh, interesting. Okay, there's something interesting. I don't know if this is a production mistake necessarily, or if they... Oh, no, they just apply motion blur. Okay. So they're applying motion blur to the shadow, as far as I can tell, and you can see that affects the background a little bit. Look at the planks in the wall here in the back, as these two characters are fighting. I can't tell who's the shadow there, but look how the lines between the planks disappear, because there's motion blur being applied to the shadow. But then once the shadow stops moving, you can see the planks reappear, and then they vanish again as the motion blur kicks up again. And here we can see a little bit of... Well, not squash and stretch, but you can see the principle applied. You can see how the foot... And this is a tiny little detail. Look how the foot lands on the right sides of the frame. See that? that little moment of, like, the foot stands still, but then it squishes down, which is anticipation for the next move, which is the person, like, this is presumably the person who the shadow belongs to, getting ready to dash and tackle that guy. And what I'm really interested in is we can see a third character right behind here, whose shadow is emerging out. And I have to wonder who they are, because that stuff right there, those little spikes on his head, indicates to me that this is someone wearing a bandana around their face. I don't think that's hair. And you can see the bulky thing on the front of their face means they're wearing some kind of gas mask, and they have a knife, so they're having a knife fight with this guy. I also love the detail that as he gets tackled, his hat flies off and falls to the ground. That's a lovely little thing. God, I love the way they do light in this thing. Because look at this. Like, the character is shaded by their helmet. This is one of Piltover's police force. They're shaded by their helmet, but as they look off to the side, look how the brim of the cap above their face kind of lights up, and the rim lights up. That's, oh, the lighting just feels so good here. I don't know if it necessarily does anything for the storytelling, but it just, oh, it's such the lovely, lovely lighting effects. And they've got that soft focus kind of thing going on, which again feels like, it's not really, but it feels like it's mimicking the properties of like light as it's rendered by a camera. And here I'm curious who the character is that this person is looking at, because I feel like I recognize those boots. But look, purple goo all over the place, which is presumably the stuff that's going to be infecting the character I'm presuming is going to be Dr. Mundo. It could be it's not Dr. Mundo, but it's just someone who gets infected with something like what happens to Mundo. Who knows? I don't. And this seems to be a flashback within the actual, because... Let's see if we can find... Because these characters look somewhat older than these. Like, this looks like very far back in the childhood. This might be when Jinx and Vi lost their home. I think that's probably what's being depicted here, before they had to go and live in Zaun, maybe. Maybe they used to live in Piltover, who knows? And here again, fast forward to their teenage years. And something I do like about the way that the characters are framed, something you can really see in the storytelling, is if you just look at this trailer, which of the sisters is in charge? Who's the leader? Who does all of the like? Who takes care of things? And who's dependent on the other in order to take care of them? Well, it's Vi. How can you tell that? It's not just because she's older. Like, that certainly helps, but Jinx is always in a subordinate position to her sister. In every shot where they're together, Vi towers over her and stands over her and like clearly takes on the role of the adult, as it were, in their relationship. And that's consistent across every shot we've seen. You can even see it here, where again, Vi is front and center and Jinx is kind of following along. The only time where Jinx is not in the shadow of her sister is when she's dealing with those Hex Crystals. Here, we are below Jinx's perspective, finally, which we aren't in any of the group shots. You can see Jinx's perspective is below our own, but Vi's is above ours, which again, being above things is a visual indicator of authority. Like, that's part of film language, and being below things is a visual indicator of weakness, subservience, submission, that kind of thing. Like, it's the strength of the characters in the frame. So you get the sense that Vi is very much in charge of this group. Jinx, her sister, is sort of following along, tagging along. And these two guys are more like collaborators. And you can again see that, like, that visual language being, you can see Jace, as we're going to call him, intruding on Victor's space here. Again, exerting power over him by being above him, but Victor isn't having any of it. He actually pushes him off. And once he does that, they are much more, like, they're not completely aligned, but they're much more equal in the frame, where here, like, you can see how Victor has to kind of push to get out of Jace's overbearing presence, which gives us a sense of their dynamic as characters in the same way that Vi always being framed above Jinx in the frames where they're together gives us a sense of her as, like, you can see literally Jinx is looking to her sister for protection, for reassurance, for guidance, as something scares her that Vi is already looking at. And you can see it here again. Jinx is looking up to Vi, quite literally looking up to her for some kind of help and protection. And that's just, like, from a visual storytelling perspective, that's really good for a trailer like this, because it lets us know, in the same way that this interaction between these two characters, again, Victor and Jace, if my prediction is correct, tells us a lot about their dynamic as characters. That framing of Jinx and Vi tells us a lot about their dynamic as siblings. And you can kind of see the same kind of, again, the idea of dominating the frame, where Vi dominates the frame here. Like, she's the center point, she's lit up by the light, everyone else is sort of halfway in shades and shadows compared to her. She's the brightest object in the frame, as it were. You can kind of see that happening here, too, with the villain guy. This is the guy he's intimidating. Who's taking up the most space in this frame? This guy. He's squeezing this dude all the way out to the left and leaving plenty of open space for him to inhabit. Like, he can raise his arm and make gestures. He's got lots of freedom in the frame, in the image of the frame. This guy is being squeezed out. And that's what makes him intimidating in the shot, is that he's dominating. He's taking control of the image. And you can see the same thing happening as this guy enters in through the door, right? Here, not that threatening, but as he occupies more and more space in the frame, he becomes more and more threatening, more and more powerful. So the film language, like the use of film language and visual language on display in the trailer is solid. Like, it seems like there's rock solid visual storytelling going on here, which I'm very pleased with. Because, like, that requires a budget. Like, it requires time and a budget and a good director to get this kind of thing right. And it requires good animators to execute the vision correctly. Someone who has a grasp on, like, the visual language of animation and of film in general. And, like, I don't want to call any specific show out or anything, but, like, I see TV animation these days, and it's like, yeah, you didn't necessarily always have the budget or the director to pull this kind of film language off. But yeah, there's a limited amount to talk about. Like, man, we've got a minute of footage and I've already talked about it for half an hour, so I'd say, oh, there's a limited amount to talk about. There is a limited amount to talk about, because what we're getting is snapshots. We're getting establishing shots of Piltover and an establishing shot of Zaun, which is establishing the contrast between the two places right away. Look at the colors, for example. The colors of Piltover, bright blue skies, you've got greens, like green trees, lush nature, and lots of white and blue, and just like sort of very clean, healthy-looking colors that are associated with nature. And then you get down to Zaun, and oh, everything is sort of this sickly green, neon greenish, glowing hue. Everything's coated in shadow, so you get this instant establishment of the juxtaposition between what's Piltover like? Well, you soar freely through the skies in airships, making incredible inventions and living in this wonderful, breathy, airy, healthy-looking city. And then there's Zaun, which is like, yeah, no, it kind of sucks down here, actually. It's not that great, is it? But there's also another difference in the way that the cities are framed. As we look at Piltover, the city is framed entirely in terms of its buildings and its architecture. As we're introduced to Zaun, we're introduced to the people. And we're introduced to a variety of people. I love the character design that we get to see. We don't get to see that much, but look at this little guy. Look at that little guy. Look at how he's got his hand on his hip like it hurts, and he's like holding a hand out as though he's begging almost. And look at the way he moves, like that crabby kind of waddling little walk. And then you have the dude with the Hex Tech or Sump Tech or Chem Tech or whatever the hell the thing is on his back, that backpack there. Like crouched over under the weight, and even though he's got smoke coming out of absolutely everything, he's still smoking. And he's got like this, because of the way his hair, that little hair tuft falls into his face, it almost looks like he's got a monobrow, and he's got that giant, like, fat nose and those sunken-in cheeks. Lots of good character design on display here. And by the way, speaking of character design, look at that crow's feet around the eyes of this particular officer. I think they're female, might be female. Crow's feet around the eyes, which indicate, like, that there's some experience to this character. And then these characters where you can see, oh, those are not natural eyes at all. And the noses. Look at the noses. There's shape to them. There is this form and volume to them. And that goes for the female characters as well, which is something that I'm really happy with. Because, my god, League of Legends, invent more than one nose for your goddamn characters sometimes. Especially the female ones. Look at that thin, long nose bridge. Compared with, like, this thick-ass nose on this dude. And I like this is something where I talked about earlier, Fortiche has a tendency towards geometric shapes. And this is kind of the thing I'm talking about. You can see, like, the dark area around Jinx's eyes as though she hasn't slept, as though she hasn't had any rest. Like, she always looks tired, doesn't she? But look at that sharp line that delineates where the bridge of her nose transitions into her forehead and up into her eyebrows. Like, that kind of sharp geometry, and you can see it too in like the jaw lines and the way that the lips are rendered. You can see that sense of geometrical shapes being applied. Like it feels almost like it's carved out of wood a little bit. Like it feels like it's carved out with those geometric shapes, and I really like that. I really love that. I also like, from a character design standpoint, look at Jinx's hair. Like, she's got the ponytail, like the braided ponytail thing going. But look the way her hair is cut, like this chaotic, unmanaged mess, which both tells us that the character herself is maybe a little bit of a mess that's barely being held together with hair clips and hope. But also that, hey, there's not a barber that's taking care of her hair. That little tuft of hair probably fell into her face and annoyed her, so she cut it off. Right? So you get that sense of, yeah, this is not someone who has someone taking that great care of them, which, like, sorry, Vi, but you're a lone kid in a terrible city trying to take care of your sister. Yeah, it's gonna end up a little bit neglectful, no matter what you do, which sucks. And contrast that with how Vi looks, right? She's under the same circumstances. She, too, does not get a barber to deal with her hair. But where Jinx's hair is all frizzy and frazzled and going everywhere, Vi has taken much more control of her hairstyle. Like, it's much more it's managed, it's under control. She's got a handle on it. It's not like the aristocrat lady in the shot here, where you can see the hairstyle is completely, like, some poor barber spent, like, or hairdresser spent, like, a couple of hours putting that shit together. But, like, she's swept it back, she's keeping it under control. It's out of her face and out of her eyes, she doesn't need to cut it. Whereas with Jinx, it's more a thing of, like, she almost kind of feels like she's given up a little bit, like, right? Like, it's, oh, hair, clip, cut it out of the way. And that also establishes a contrast between the characters and their personalities. The Jinx is the one who feels more helpless, right? And you can see the difference here. Like, she's still got wild hair at this point, but none of that random cutting. And it's also an earlier point, you can't see her ponytail. But none of that wild random cutting. And you can see Vi's hairstyle is also very different here. Much more managed, less her sweeping it out of her face. More someone spent time cutting that, which again makes me think that this is a shot of them losing their home and their parents, which is what drives them to go to Son in order to try and survive. At least that's what I'm kind of getting from the narrative being teased here. And, look at that. Like, this is what really makes me think that this is Mundo, because look at his muscle. Look at the arm muscle as he transforms. Blort. Blort. You can see how it's blur, blur. It's almost like it's coughing or vomiting inside him, which is not a great thing to have your muscles do to you. And then, of course, there's the final shot, confirming that Jinx is certainly going to be in the series. Even if you could convince me that they're doing a massive fake out and it's not Vi and Jinx who are the sisters, but they're going to encounter Jinx at some point. Who knows? Like, it's not impossible. I doubt it, though. The thing I quite like about this shot, though, and the thing I wonder is, why are Jinx's shoelaces perfect? Why are they symmetrical? Shouldn't they be completely fucked up? Oh, well, I guess she takes good care of her boots. Like, look at this little motion. Okay, so this is hard to tell, but look at the way this presumably being near her ankle somewhere. As she puts the foot down, look how the the whole shape kind of bends this way a little bit. Like, you can see how it kind of angles itself this way, almost as though her foot is a little bit broken. It's not, of course, but almost as though it is. And then it rights itself as the foot goes back into frame. I love that little... You see that? That little motion. As this bit moves a little bit right and left, twisting alongside her move. Anyway, that's just me. That's just the kind of tiny nonsense that I get excited about. That little twist of the fabric indicating that her foot is kind of the leg itself is moving underneath the boot. The boot is not static. It's not just a static boot that falls on the ground. You can see the fabric moving to conform with what the flesh underneath is doing, and I really like that. That's kind of rare. Anyway, like I said, we don't really get much to work with here in terms of acting. Like, I would really love a long dialogue scene to look at, but we don't get that. The only dialogue scene we actually get is this one, which is just a guy saying a line. And I do like the subtlety of the acting. Like, even though it's like, this is not subtle at all. Like, him going completely in the other guy's face, but that little... the little head nodding down as the eyes go up and as the lips form the word. And you can also see it, like, if you look around his nose as he talks. You see the skin moving around there, kind of indicating this, like, sneer that he's talking with, which tells us very clearly that he does not really respect the person he's talking to. He kind of disdains them. Very good. Just all of it very excellent, what I've seen so far. And I'm extremely excited for more trailers for me to sit here and just kind of warble over for a good long while. And I also love this detail. This is something I should have talked about. Look at the buttons on this chest. Like, she's opening some kind of chest that has these hex crystals inside it, right? And first of all, look at the mechanism there on the side. You can see how that, like, they kind of spring out of the way as though she's disengaging some locks and as though there's some complicated mechanism being operated inside the chest that's sliding out of the way. But then look at the... This is something I love about the environment design. Look at these buttons here. Like those little locking mechanisms. All of them are unique, different shapes. Like, they're not just the same button copy-pasted 3 times. They made 3 distinct buttons. And you can see the same thing with the little holders for the hex crystals down here. They're all just a little bit different. Like, this one's bent a little bit different than that one, a little bit different than that one. And the 2 locking mechanisms over here, completely distinct from each other. There's no copy-pasting going on. This is a symmetrical object, right? Like, this chest is symmetrical along its x-axis. You could just copy-paste and make it completely symmetrical and make it all look even, but they haven't. They've given it all this texturing and all this difference and personality, which does so much for the visual world building, but it's also like, yeah, that's a lot of extra effort to go through for a chest where we'll probably only ever see this shot one time. Like, this 3D object of the chest might only be used one time in the whole goddamn thing, and yet they go through the trouble. And you can see that, like, the closet behind here that's sort of a little bit open, and the books that are all different. Like, there's so many ways that you can cut corners when you're dealing with 3D animation, because you can just copy-paste objects across the scene. There's so many ways you can cut corners. There's so many ways you can save on a little bit of effort and time. Like, for instance, these beakers behind here. Again, not the focus of the scene. You're not really meant to be looking at them or caring about them at all. You're meant to be looking at and caring about this stuff. And yet... 3 completely different beakers, like even one without the lid. Like, it's not just they've taken the same beaker and deformed it, it's they've made 3 different beakers. And that's the level of polish and effort that excites me about this, is like, they bothered. You can even see it here, like these things that kind of go across the window. See how that one is kind of broken and poking out over the side of the one it's supposed to attach to a little bit, which again contributes to the rundown atmosphere. But again, it's like, you didn't have to do that. No one would have noticed that except creepy, obsessive weirdos like me who frame by frame their way through shit. No one would have seen it. But it's there, and it contributes to the feeling. And I like it. Even the banisters here. Look at that little flower thing that they've got sitting there, little shitty rich people. Different. I like that so much. Like, that's the kind of thing that excites me a little bit. Speaking of symmetry, I wonder... Because the shots we see of Sawnite interiors, Like, mostly they're a little bit, like, even when they're framed around this symmetrical thing, you can see there's little inconsistencies between the sides. It's a little bit off-kilter all the time. But the shots we get of Piltover interiors, like this one, and this one, symmetry across both sides. There's still handcrafted symmetry, so it's not like it's copy-paste perfect, but there's symmetry in the Piltover shots, and there's much less symmetry in a lot of the shots that take place in Sawn. Like, there's much more tilted angles and unevenness there, and I wonder if that's going to be part of the visual language of the series as well. Like, that Piltover has this much more controlled, symmetrical, refined, calm air about a lot of it, the way it's designed, whereas Sawn, of course, is just a big bundle of Hextech, Chemtech chaos. Curious about that. Anyway, I think that's enough. 40 minutes, that's enough for a 1-minute teaser. That's probably enough. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this, feel free to hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons. You can also head on over to Patreon if you want to support the channel directly. I also have some tip jars, so you can do those instead of doing, like, signing up for a subscription. You can do a one-time tip, and I would also appreciate that. And, as I try to say at the end of all my videos, when it comes to online content creation, especially on YouTube, $1 is the same as sometimes thousands of views on videos, like literal thousands of views. So especially for creators who are starting out, who aren't that big, even those very small donations of like maybe just $1 make a lot more of a difference than you think. Like, it can really make the difference between a video that does nothing and a video that does, you know, something. So whether it's me or someone else, and in fact, I would encourage you to support especially smaller content creators. If there's a content creator whose work you enjoy, please consider supporting them directly, even with the very small amounts, because they contribute a lot more than you think, and they matter to us a lot more than you think. Of course, if you're not in a position to be able to contribute financially to any content creator, believe me, we understand. We know what it's like not to have enough money to do all the things you want to do. That's our jobs, especially when we're starting out. So don't worry about that. If you haven't enjoyed this video, then impressive that you made it through 40 minutes of it. I guess you're here now. That was a great way to spend your time, I suppose. I mean, I'm mocking you a little bit, but Jesus Christ, dude, if you didn't like the video, just turn it off. Go outside. The sky's blue. No, the sky's gray, actually. It's raining. Well, okay, stay inside. Play video games. Don't listen to me on the internet. What are you, crazy? Anyway, just ignore the dislike button. You don't need to click it. Just close the video. Maybe hit the like button on your way out just for fun. You know, just to be crazy. Like Jinx, you can be crazy and hit the like button instead of the dislike button. That's an option. You can be like Jinx, who is a traumatized child who lost her parents. Okay, maybe not so much like Jinx. Thank you for watching. Watching. I hate when I mess up V's and W's.